welcome to the War Dove podcast. I'm your host, War Dove, aka Joe, and I'm joined by Stephen Marks tonight. He is a seasoned political consultant known for his expertise in opposition research and has had a successful career that spans political campaigns, investigative reporting, and a brief stint in electoral politics. So, welcome to the program, Stephen. It's such a pleasure, such an honor to have you on here. I know you've been on 360. I know you've been on all sorts of shows, so it's an honor to have you here on the podcast and get to talk to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But the most important thing I've done is since 2000 election, Gore and Bush. I've also done super PAC ads in every presidential election since then, using issues that the campaigns didn't have either the brains or the balls to use. That's really what I've done the best. And I also wrote a book called Confessions of a Political Hitman, which explains why negative campaigning works better than positive campaigning.
That's, I got to say, that's an interesting psychological tidbit there, before I get into the standard questions. That's interesting. Real briefly, why do you think that negative campaigning seems to work better than positive campaigning?
Because since 2004, that's Kerry and Bush, every presidential election we've had since then, including the one that's upcoming, has two candidates with under a 50% approval rating. This is very unusual. Before that, everybody had over 50 at least. This year, you're going to have two presidential candidates under 40% approval. So what happens is and two incumbents, which means people have already made up their minds about those two guys. Now, RFK Jr., we don't know about him, but putting him aside, the only way either side can win, they can't make their candidate, I think they can, but they believe they can't make their candidate look better because of the polling. So the only way, I'm not saying this is the case in this year's election, but in the past, when you have a candidate that you're working for and you can't possibly make anybody like him, the only way to win is to make the other person look worse. Now, there's one other reason why everything has to go negative. It's because of the law that was passed in 2010, saying super PACs were allowed to put out ads using not the FEC, but going through the IRS. What you see on TV now are actually 501c3 ads as if they came from a charity. So there's no limits because of Citizens United case in the Supreme Court. There's no limits on money, and it's what's called dark money, which means people want to contribute, that nobody knows who you are. This guy, George Soros, he's on the Democratic side. Now the Republicans do it too. He's a genius. He figured out a way to get around all the FEC law by creating a 501c3 to deal with the IRS. So but I'm finally getting to the point. According to the IRS, when you put out any kind of ad, you do not have the right to advocate the election of any candidate. But you can't say vote for candidate A or candidate A is a good, but you can say candidate B is a pedophile, likes to screw his dog. You say anything you want negative. It's legal. But you cannot say vote for candidate A. So that's another reason why campaigns have been forced to go negative. If they want to get the big money, super PAC money in, and from people who might not want their names on any FEC documents that are public record, the only way you can do it is by using these negative campaigns. Plus, like I said, the other reason, when you have two candidates that have a low approval rating, the only way you can win is by making the other guy worse.
That says so much about our laws, so much about, wow. Yeah, you can't even say something good about candidate A, but you can say something bad about candidate B. That's
right. And I'll give you the best example.
Sure.
In 2016, Donald Trump had about a 43 to 45% approval. You know why he won? Because Hillary had about a 38 or 37%. I mean, that's how he won. People were voting for change that year. And Hillary, at her convention, said, I'm going to be a third term of President Obama. That's not what people wanted to hear. They didn't vote for Trump because they wanted Donald Trump. They wanted change. And after Bernie Sanders was knocked out of the race by Hillary, and that's a whole story in itself why the Democrats, all the polls showed Sanders would have been a stronger candidate. They thought Hillary was like being anointed, I guess, because she had the name Clinton.
Yeah, it was her term, I always say, yeah.
but she didn't have. It would not have been a third term of Bill Clinton. Trust me.
Mm.
The person that sighed the biggest sigh of relief when Hillary lost trust me, was Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Mm.
Because whatever positive legacy Bill Clinton leaves, and he leaves overall, we thought of he left under a cloud because of impeachment, but we think back very, very warmly about him now. If she would have became president, trust me, his whole legacy would have been in the toilet. But anyway, in that election, the reason why Donald Trump won, he was the only candidate for change. They weren't voting really for Donald Trump yet. They were voting for change. And the same thing, unfortunately, for Trump happened in the last election. They weren't voting for Biden. Trump was unpopular because of COVID, and they wanted change. And again, you had two candidates in like the 40s, low 40s, I think, to mid 40s approval rating. The only way for change was to vote for Joe Biden. Now we have the exact opposite. People do not like the job Joe Biden's doing, and they want change.
Yeah,
So
people
they have to choose between Donald Trump and I guess RFK Jr.
Yeah, people are struggling right now. I did want to, get like a basic career overview from you. I mean, you've had a really amazing career. Could you describe your journey in politics, particularly what drew you into the field of opposition research?
Well, yeah, okay. I was working actually in music until I was in my mid 30s.
I love it. What
And
do you play? What do you play?
piano.
Oh, I love it. That's beautiful.
And I'll put in a plug, BeatlesHauntingMelodies.com if you want to go listen to my CD and maybe even purchase it. But anyway,
I
when
do.
I was when I was really getting interested in politics, Ronald Reagan's the one that got me very jacked up about politics.
Hmm.
First time I really loved a candidate, except when I was a kid, I really loved Bobby Kennedy Sr. So he was my first real love. I lived in New York. He was our senator at the time, but that's beside the point. We all loved John Kennedy, so we loved Bob. But Bobby was different. John was a quiet, easygoing, not quiet, but easygoing, laid-back guy. Bobby was intense. But that's besides the point. After Reagan got elected so easily twice, 45 states and 49 states, and then Bush gets elected on his coattails, Bush won basically as a third term of Reagan. I just figured we're going to have 50 years of Republican rule like we did after Lincoln. I think between Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson, you had Grover Cleveland, but he was sort of a very conservative Democrat. And pretty much Republican rule for 50, 60 years. I thought that was going to happen. So it was a shock to me when Clinton got elected. And at the time, unlike how I feel about him now, I hated him, because of all the lying about the womanizing and the draft dodging. In retrospect, nobody cared.
Yeah.
He did a pretty good job as president. But at the time, I decided to make a career change. I went down to Washington. And since I had a little bit of experience with independent, I wrote for newspapers. Like, what do you call it when you expose? My mind just went blank. When you expose.
An expose?
Yeah. I wrote exposés. So I had some research. I mean, I had some experience with writing. So I went to Washington. I wanted to be a press secretary. So I went on, I don't know, 50 interviews, 100, I don't remember how many. I had no experience really in politics. Problem was I was 37 and I'm being interviewed by these 25-year-old chiefs of staff for all these different members of Congress. And it's not a good situation when you're smarter than they are. And the chief of staff of a member of Congress or a senator, they want complete control, and they want control over who has access to the member, and anybody who's a threat to them, they don't want you around. So I didn't realize this at the time. So luckily, just by dumb luck, I was just talking to people on the Hill about my situation. Plus, the other mistake I was making was I would say to each one of them, here's how I think I can help your congressman or senator. That was the stupidest thing to say, because when you say that, you're implying that they don't know what they're doing, which I guess maybe subconsciously I was, but I didn't mean it that way. Where you're supposed to say, I love the job you're doing. Let me try to help you with your vision of so-and-so. I didn't understand that. So, but I met this guy. He was the head of opposition research for the National Republican Congressional Committee. That's the NRCC, same building as the RNC. And he explained what he did. I explained what I did. We exchanged numbers. It wasn't really an interview. And then I did get a job in the summer of 1994 as a press secretary in Tennessee for one of the Senate candidates that lost to Bill Frist, who later became the Senate Majority Leader. And after that primary we lost, out of the blue, I get this phone call from this guy in Washington I had met 6 months earlier. He said, "How would you like to do opposition research?" I didn't even know what the words meant, because before my book came out, nobody knew, in the media even knew. They just called it digging up dirt, or they called it using negative campaigning, whatever. So he said to me, "Look, you've done, it's investigative reporting." That's the words I was trying to. He said, "You've done investigative reporting. It's kind of the same thing, except you're investigating the backgrounds of these candidates and our candidates too. We want to know where we're going to get hit." And he explained to me the process. You have to, in those days, they didn't have much internet like Nexus and Lexus on the internet. You literally had to go to wherever the candidate lived, into whatever counties he ever lived, and go to the courthouses, look for lawsuits, divorces, any kind of arrests. And you had to go to the libraries in these cities because they didn't have the databases they have today. And you had to go through microfilm of all the years that person's been in whatever office he's in. And so I started doing that first for the National NRCC Congressional Committee. Then I did it in 96 cycle for the NRSC, that's the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And then I eventually just went out on my own and I had made a lot of connections through my years, in Washington, and I was very good at it. And I just went out on my own and was hired by campaigns, by committees. Every state has a Republican and Democratic committee. Right. Special interest groups. On the right, you have the NRA and the Christian Coalition. On the left, you have Emily's List and the abortion rights groups. They all want opposition research too. So there's a lot of there's so many people, and you have all 50 states, not all of the races. The ones where the races are in play, even if it's half the states, they also have committees. So everybody wants opposition research before it was called opposition research. So
got into it.
Yeah, so trying to get to the I did a radio talk show for iHeart when I was living in Florida, so I have a tendency to babble on a lot. So
okay.
But I'll try to make it faster. So anyway, then in 2007, 2008, I wrote that book, Confession of the Political Hitman, where I was on all the TV shows, and people learned. And that was the first time I remember on Anderson Cooper, by the way, who's the nicest person in the media on CNN. And what really, really gnaws at me is when I look on YouTube when I'm being interviewed by him 17 years ago, I've aged a lot. And he looks like the same person. It's ridiculous.
You look great.
Anyway, nicest guy. He called it oppositional research because he never heard, but really not super nice, super smart. And what I love about him is he never takes sides. He lets both sides on his show. CNN leans left, but he makes sure his show is even.
Sure.
And anyway, so after the book, I continued to do opposition research, and then I got more interested in music in the last 4 or 5 years. So I put out this CD, which is doing very well. But when the presidential campaign comes around, like this year, I started getting interested in it again, and I guess I can never get rid of that, And this last thing, real quickly, when I wrote the book, the purpose of it was to get out of politics, because I figured if I write this book, what we do is supposed to be under the radar screen when you're digging up dirt on politicians, when you're researching. And here I put out this book, which is the opposite. I thought nobody's going to hire me now. Because of the publicity of the book, I started getting calls from guys who wouldn't give me the time of day. They all wanted to hire me, including, I can mention Roger Stone and some people who's, by the way, of all the Trump people, he's the one that he's the one that got screwed, and Trump was right to pardon him. I'll tell you why. He was convicted of listening in on a phone conversation between Donald Trump and the guy from the Ukraine to try to dig up dirt on Hunter Biden.
Right, right.
You're just listening in on a conversation. Yes, it does violate some kind of federal law, but to get whatever it was, 2, 3, 4 years, that's ridiculous.
Hmm.
Anyway, so that pardon and some of the other ones I think were appropriate. But anyway, Roger's a great guy. Anyway, besides him, other people started calling me up, and it got to be the opposite. I wanted to get out of politics, so I figured if I write this book, nobody's going to hire me anymore. I wanted to go back into music, but then it kind of got to my head, you know, and that I became in the book. I talk about how both parties, when the Republicans, 1994 was my first year working in politics. That was the year we took over Congress for the first time since Herbert Hoover.
Oh,
Republicans
wow.
both houses of Congress. Clinton was very unpopular after his first 2 years because he was basically letting Hillary run the White House because of a deal they made during the Jennifer Flowers thing in New Hampshire on 60 Minutes. And she was such a disaster. You know that she had a health care plan before Obamacare that was so corrupt it didn't even get into the committee, and the committee's all Democrats. So both houses of Congress were controlled by Democrats in those days. Anyway, all of those scandals in Bill Clinton's first term. Think about it. I'm sorry, my mind just went blank for a second, but I'll figure it out. You had the cattle futures. You had the travel office scandal. You had Whitewater. You had all these different scandals. Bill Clinton had nothing to do with any of those. He only had to do with the sexual stuff, which didn't hurt him politically because everybody watching it is thinking, by the grace of God, if I was in the same position, I would have lied under oath too. But anyway, there were all these scandals, and it was all Hillary. And he had nothing to do with it, but it really hurt him politically, plus her failed healthcare thing, if you remember.
Right.
And we won Congress. We took over both houses of Congress for the first time, like I said, since the 1920s. And I forgot where I was even going with this because I just keep blathering on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what was I talking about before? I know you can cut this out. What was I talking about before I went off?
You were talking about the process of your career and how when you wrote a book, you wrote
right,
the book, you didn't think, oh, nobody's going to hire me.
No, now I remember. In the book, I exposed corruption on both sides.
Hmm.
And I talked about how I was a true believer in 94. I thought when we took over Congress, we're not going to be like the Democrats. We're going to be different. And one of the first things that was symbolic, but it wasn't a big deal, but it was very symbolic. Members of Congress, they have their own elevators in each building where the staffers have to wait for 5 elevators. And the one elevator is just for members of Congress. Can you imagine this? And they go up and they got a guy working like usually an older black guy with a cap,
No.
It's crazy. Just for the senators and the congressmen. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, Ted Kennedy was the best at letting people, he was very nice, and he let staffers come up with him. But anyway, this rule was very symbolic of showing how corrupt the Democrats were. So we ran on one of the things was we're going to get rid of this elevator, this elitism. And you know what happened? That lasted about 2 weeks before the Republicans. I could see signs that we were becoming like them because we were in power. But I didn't really see it all right away. Now, after the first year in Congress, we had 50 new members of Congress, freshmen. 10 of them got divorced in the first year. There's a lot of these guys in 92, when we took over Congress, they weren't politicians. They were regular guys like pharmacists, real estate agents, regular people.
Sure.
Who normally could never get elected, but that was such an anti-Clinton year that these guys ended up in office. And they come from Iowa or Ohio or Middle America. Next thing they know, in Washington D.C., and they're rock stars. You're a congressman. You literally have hundreds of women after you every single day, like the Beatles when they went to Ed Sullivan when they're walking on the street. You seen the movie Hard Day's Night? There's 1,000. That wasn't film. That was real. There's 1,000 women chasing them around. That's what a congressman is. It doesn't matter how fat and ugly you might be. It's such a turn on to women. So we had 10 divorces of guys who, and I can say one of them was Mark Sanford, about his scandal, and anyway, and little by little, I started seeing that we were becoming as corrupt as them. And I personally was becoming corrupt in my life. And I talked about this. I let it get to my head. I was on TV all the time with my super PAC ads against Gore, against Kerry, against Obama. And, D.C., it's a very small, Capitol Hill is a very small geographical area where everybody kind of knows each other.
Huh.
And because I was recognizable, because when I was on television, it got to my head. I became as corrupt as the politicians I was criticizing. And I talk about this in the book, too. How once you have some kind of power, some kind of credibility or notoriety for the first time in your life, it does go to your head. And so I became so in the book, I talk about on both sides. I'll give you one great example. Why did Bill Clinton, after he was impeached in the House, why was he not removed in the Senate? They had him dead to rights. He violated high crimes and misdemeanors. He lied under oath in a federal grand jury. Like you or I would go to jail for 5 years for that.
Yeah.
Now, so the question everybody's asking themselves is, why did the Republicans who had control of the U.S. Senate, they could have voted him, they had the votes to make him gone. But you know what? Bill Clinton was a very smart man, and he liked J. Edgar Hoover, who had dirt on everybody to protect himself. You know that whole background, right? Bill Clinton must have had, I don't know it's the fact, but all I know is Orrin Hatch went on Larry King the day after Clinton gave his first mea culpa speech. And he called him a sleazebag. And Orrin Hatch is this Mormon straight-laced guy. He was using language you wouldn't expect it. Called him a lowlife or sleep. He either said sleazebag or scumbag. I don't remember which. I was kind of shocked. And he goes, he's going down. 2 days later, Orrin Hatch on TV. I'm going to be voting against impeachment. Thank you. No comment. So they had something on him, right? And then Robert Byrd, the great senator from West Virginia, Democrat, he kept, when they came to the Senate after he was impeached in the House, Clinton was nervous. And he was actually pressuring some members of the Senate or talking to them when he's not supposed to do that. And Robert Byrd gets on TV and he goes, don't tamper with this jury. Technically, they're a jury in the Senate. And people were Now, that was important because if he would go against Clinton, he would give cover to other Democrats to vote because you need 67, you need 2/3. Because you have to get Democrats to vote. And it really looked bad for Clinton because Robert Byrd going against him. Next day, Robert Byrd's on TV. I'm voting. I'm voting against impeachment. Done. No questions. Thank you. Had the goods on him. And I could just imagine, and I'm sure, and do you know, unlike Watergate, where witnesses were called, that's how Nixon got killed. John Dean and all these people got up and said John Dean said that he was the president's lawyer, Nixon. There's a cancer in the White House. You know, in the Monica Lewinsky impeachment thing, they were not allowed to call live witnesses, which meant if Betty Curry, who was Clinton's secretary, if she was called to the stand, to the witness trial and said, what did Bill Clinton say to you about Monica? She, being an honest person, she would have said, he said to me, I never knew Monica, right? He was coaching her. I never had anything to do with Monica, right? But that never came out because the Republicans agreed to these rules where they couldn't call witnesses. There was no way to get rid of Bill Clinton without calling witnesses. So they protected him because Clinton had to have had dirt on all of them. But in retrospect, just to put it all in proper context, in the end, it was the right thing. Both parties were right. The Republicans were right that he violated high crimes and misdemeanors, but the Democrats were right that it was all about sex. So in the end, he got impeached. He left under a cloud, but he wasn't removed from office. Kind of a compromise. I think that was, and I write this in my book, that was probably the right thing because what he did was bad, but it wasn't terrible.
Right.
So anyway, was I supposed to say anything else? I forget. My short-term.
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're good, Steven. I should also mention that your assistant Caden is joining us as well, and I really appreciate him coming on the program as well.
No,
Um,
he's my partner.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really? A business partner, huh? I like
Oh,
it.
not, oh, sort of.
Yeah,
Sort of.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on too. I just realized that I hadn't acknowledged you yet, and
That was very rude of you.
yes, it is. Yes, it is, and I sincerely apologize.
That is not the gentlemanly thing to do.
It is not, and I should have. I caught it though, and I'm glad I did.
All right.
And so, in your book, Confessions of a Political Hitman, you delve into the intricacies of political campaigns.
Yeah.
What do you believe is the most misunderstood aspect of the political campaign by the general public?
Misunderstood?
Yeah, the most.
Honestly? Okay,
Sure.
I'll tell you what's the most misunderstood, that they're all crooks. It's not true. Most members of Congress and most presidents are decent people who get into situations you have to compromise your integrity to some degree. Now, you have exceptions. Well, I'm sorry, let me get back to that.
Sure.
You have to get things done. You have to compromise. And even Donald Trump is doing that right now, kind of going back a little on abortion. You understand? Because he doesn't want to lose all the female votes. To get elected, you do have to compromise your belief, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's how things get done. You make compromises. And public thinks they're all crooks, they're all jerks, and it's not true. They're mostly very decent men and women, and they get some. Some of them are honest 100% of the time. Ronald Reagan was honest. Now, yes, he did misspeak about with Iran-Contra that he wasn't trading arms for hostages, but then he realized after a few days, you know what? We needed those hostages out, and they needed arms because when the Ayatollah took over during the hostage crisis with Jimmy Carter, and don't even get me going on him because he's anyway. So these moderates in Iran who wanted to reestablish good relations like we had with the Shah went to Israel, and through Israel they went to Oliver North and McFarlane and Poindexter and said, we got a really great idea. These guys, after the Ayatollah drops dead, now he was 100 years old. Nobody knew he was going to live to be 115 or whatever. He's going to drop dead soon. We want to have good relations with you again. So it sounded like a really good idea to do this. But each side didn't really trust each other, so they had to show, some kind of, they had to show something to trust each other. So each side asked each other, what can we do to help you? And they said to us, we need arms because they were in a war with Iraq. And ironically, Saddam Hussein was with the Iraqis that we were actually on the same side with. And they said to us, what do you need? And Reagan said, we'd really like the hostages out. Now, even though those hostages, I don't have any sympathy for them. Reagan and the government told them to get out of Lebanon for a year. Get out. It's going to be really bad. And they chose either because they hated America or they married Lebanese women. They chose to stay there. But Reagan was when we had an agent there, he was a CIA spy, actually, James Buckley. And he was supposedly an ambassador, but he was really a spy, and they caught him and they tortured him in ways you can't even imagine. And they sent the video of the torture to President Reagan. And when he saw that, he, against his better judgment, he said, let's get those hostages out. So he didn't see it as trading arms for hostages. He saw it as two separate things. But after a couple of days, he realized that wasn't his intent, but that's what happened. It really was trading arms for hostages. So he went on TV, took his medicine like a man, the opposite of Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon, who had very minor thing, chose to lie about it. He took his medicine like a man, went on TV, said, I did something really stupid. And I didn't think of it as trading arms for hostages, but that's what it was. And it's never going to happen again. And I'm really, really sorry. And the next day, his approval rating went up like 20 points. Same thing next. John Kennedy, same thing. After Bay of Pigs, he took he wasn't even in office for a year. He took his medicine like a man. He got up and he told him, you know what, I really screwed up. And I'm really sorry. Now, Nixon and Clinton, the opposite, over something so minor. All Clinton had to do was get on TV and say, you know what, to the public, I'm really sorry, but I misspoke today in front of the grand jury. I said I didn't know Monica Lewinsky. We did have an inappropriate relationship. I'm really sorry. I feel terrible for my family, my staffers, you guys in the media. I lied to all of you about it. And I think if you were in the same position, you'd understand, but it was wrong. I'm really sorry. That's a 2-day news story because everybody knows that Clinton was a bad boy with the girls. Nobody cared. All he had to do was say that he was served out his second term. He already had a deal with Dolan Gingrich to bring up the Social Security age of 66. He would have gone down as an excellent president. Richard Nixon, all he had to do was get on TV. He was not involved in the Watergate burglary. Get on TV. But two guys that worked for his campaign committee to get reelected was called CREEP. And they did that. They thought it was funny, G. Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt. Committee to reelect the president. And on the office door, it said CREEP, So, but all he had to do, President Nixon, was get on TV and said, I'm really sorry, but you know what? A couple of schmucks that work for my campaign did the stupidest thing today. They broke into the DNC headquarters. Why do you break into headquarters when you're 20 points up in the polls, which Nixon was over? It's the dumbest thing in the world. These guys are going to jail. I'm really sorry I hired them. Again, 2-day news story. But Nixon chose instead to cover the whole thing up because he felt loyalty towards them after what they did to try to help him get reelected, as misguided as it was. But where Clinton and Nixon lied about it and ended up, Nixon left office, Clinton left under a cloud, and his legacy is badly tarnished by it, where he was overall a very good president. Kennedy and Reagan did the exact opposite. They took their medicine. But going back to your original question, if you just look at the presidents since Roosevelt was an honest man, Truman was an honest man, Ike was an honest man, Kennedy was an honest man, Lyndon Johnson dishonest, obviously Richard Nixon dishonest, Ford honest, Reagan honest, Carter honest, Bush 1 honest, Bush 2 Bush W. I'm going to say the book's out on him, the way he handled Iraq and the WMDs. He was dishonest with certain things. President Obama, totally dishonest. What I'm trying to say is most of our presidents have been honest men, and it's the same thing for members of Senate and the House. They're mostly decent people. So that's the one, but they're forced because of our system, which is so corrupt because of you need money to get elected. Ross Perot was the only one that had the right idea. He was going to take money out of politics like they do in Britain. And the whole campaign's like 5 months long, and anybody can run, and the government pays for it. But unfortunately, Perot dropped out of the race, if you remember, the day he was ahead in the polls. The day Clinton gave his acceptance speech, he dropped out to screw Bush because he thought Bush, as CIA director under Ford, he thought there were soldiers in Vietnam that they were still holding, which wasn't true, but he thought they were. So screw Bush. He knew that if he dropped out, people wanted to change. Bush would be the only person, Clinton would be the only man left to change if Perot was out of the race. But Perot had the right idea to get rid of money in politics. That would clean up so much. And that's why you have to get elected. And to get the money, sometimes you have to sometimes make deals and say, well, if you give me, this will, and it's all legal. But sometimes it crosses a line of being unethical. Sometimes they do things that are stupid and illegal with campaign contributions. And that's what people have. Whenever something bad happens to any president, everybody goes, oh, they all do it. It's not true. But people have a very low opinion of politicians. And all I'm saying is they're put in a very difficult position. Some of them can be totally honest, like Reagan, 100% of the time, and not have to lie about anything. And he didn't have to worry about raising money. He was an actor in Hollywood. He was on TV, and everybody knew who he was. Governor of California, where he can raise a lot of money in California, big state. Just like W was able to raise a ton of money. He's from Texas, a lot of dough over there. Lyndon Johnson too. And then you had Kennedy, whose father was a billionaire, I guess. But if you don't have a lot of wealth like that, you have to do things to get elected, and that's where people end up doing things that are sometimes legal but unethical, or sometimes even go even cross the line.
Mm.
So that's the one notion. But I will say this, that at least half the members of Congress are not that smart, but they're honest, decent people.
And that's that's a comforting thing to know. It's a good thing to know that they do try to be honest.
They do.
Yeah, I did have a quick follow-up because you did mention George W. Bush, that
Yeah.
the book's still out on him with the Iraq thing. You
And
know,
that's personal to you, I know.
yeah, it's very personal to me. I'm wearing the memorial bracelet for Specialist Justin C. Jackson from Texas, United States Army, killed Operation Iraqi Freedom, March 12th, 2008. He was one of
Thank
three
you for your
soldiers.
sir. I appreciate you, sir.
He was one of three soldiers from my battalion that was killed. And I'll be honest, I'm pretty mad at George Bush over that.
I know.
And
And I'll tell you why I'm mad at him.
yeah,
And I helped him get reelected twice, by the way. My super PAC ad against against Gore and against
yeah,
Kerry, and you can see them on YouTube, were devastating. I helped him twice. And those were, as you know, he won both those elections with one state. If just a few votes went the other way, he would have lost both those elections. I think he's a guy, he was a very good governor in Texas who went in with good intentions and was a decent man. He had a lot of issues when he was young, but he got over his personal thing with drinking, became a born-again Christian, got elected president because basically Gore was just a terrible, unlikable candidate.
he was.
And he was a nice guy, Bush. He had the same personality as Clinton, like Bubba from the South, like a nice guy. But my two things with him, the first one was Natalie Holloway, which to me, to this day, I think about her. They had these guys in jail who they knew killed her. One of them had some kind of connection with his father had a connection with the government. They had these guys in jail for 7 to 10 days before they just let them out. And as you know, one of them went on to Brazil or some South American country, killed another girl. All George W. Bush had to do was call the Netherlands. They own Bahamas. And said, look, pal, you put those guys in jail today or tomorrow, or else you lose all of their main source of income is tourism from America. All they had to do was make a simple phone call. An American on vacation gets killed, and the government, that other government, lets the killer loose. All W had to do was just say, look, buddy, put those guys in jail, or you're not going to have any more tourism. Your country will be bankrupt. Second thing, the Valerie Plame story, right? Probably better than anybody. Okay, don't get me going on that. But when it was leaked that there were no WMDs in how do you pronounce the country? Niger or not? That's
Niger. Yes.
Yes. There was no uranium there. And the guy that leaked it was he was actually a former ambassador under Bush 1. When he leaked it, they retaliated by outing his wife, Valerie Plame, who was a spy. We don't even know where. But wherever she was, she had to flee there to save her life. And all those people she dealt with, all their lives are now in danger because she was outed as a spy by people in the Bush, by people close to, not by Bush person, but people. I don't think Bush would have done it personally, not the kind of guy, but people that were working for him, who were sympathetic to him, leaked her name. I can mention Robert Novak. He's the one that he was on CNN. You remember him on Crossfire?
Yes.
He was half drunk, and you'd see his dentures like moving around in his mouth, and he'd be talking like this. And he was a really smart guy, brilliant man. And Crossfire was a great show with him. But anyway, he was the one that leaked this, and he had two sources close to Bush where he was safe saying that, and put Valerie Plame's life in danger, and all those people she dealt with, other American spies, and the people in those other countries who were helping our spies, because they had to cover up the fact that there were no WMDs. And what makes it even stupider, he didn't need the excuse of WMDs. Saddam Hussein broke every single part of the treaty when we kicked him out of Kuwait. You can't do this. You can't do this. He broke every one. That was good enough reason to go in there and take him out. We didn't even have to make up but the obviously WMD sounds like a stronger reason. Weapons of mass destruction implying possibly a nuclear weapon. That was something that the American public after 9/11 would get behind. And he got that. But and he didn't know initially the intelligence was wrong. He really believed President Bush that there were WMD. But then when he found out about it was wrong, he continued this charade. That whole thing where he landed on, that must have driven you crazy when he landed on the boat, mission accomplished. What, I'm just curious, I'm interviewing you now. What did that make you feel?
Well,
I'm serious.
Yeah, sure. I was I was a young kid at the time. I went to Iraq in 2008. So I was
Okay.
actually really happy about that. I felt like, we did a good thing in Iraq. And then when I went to Iraq, my opinion of that changed. Now I look back on that mission accomplished like, like what a stupid thing to say. But I
But
do,
he believed it though.
sure. But I do have a three-pronged question. And again, it's okay if we disagree. We can have different opinions. I love you anyway. You're a great guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, thank you. You too.
what
It's too bad. It's too bad the Democrats and Republican most voters don't feel that way. You can't have a conversation
I know.
whether you're pro Trump, anti-Trump, pro Biden, you can't have a civil conversation with at least half of the people now.
No. It's completely insane. So, my question is this: when he knew that it was a lie, why did he continue? And um, you know,
That's
do
that's
you,
that's my opinion.
yeah,
When Ronald Reagan was president, he didn't have any foreign policy experience. So he wanted brilliant. He was not as scared of having people brighter than him. He deliberately brought in Schultz and Weinberger as Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, because they always disagreed. But he wanted that. And by the way, am I supposed to be looking at myself or at you when I'm talking?
you look wherever you want, Stephen.
No, but what I want to look straight at the camera, so I'm looking
Yeah,
at myself. Is that okay?
yeah.
All right. Anyway, Ronald Reagan wanted two articulate, brilliant minds that always disagreed because he wanted to hear both sides. And whoever side he took, they all went behind them. The two guys. Sometimes he took Schultz's side, sometimes he took Weinberger's side, and in the end, whichever side he took, the losing side, would always, tell the press he agreed with whatever Reagan did. So George W. Bush tried to use that model. He liked that model. So he brought in two guys who were both brilliant and both would always disagree. He brought in Colin Powell as Secretary of State, and he brought Don Rumsfeld as Secretary of Defense. And it was a really good idea. But here was the rub. You had Dick Cheney, Vice President, he was the deciding vote when they disagreed. Instead of hearing just two people, it was always two against one. And of the four of them, the only one that would serve in the military was Colin Powell. And the other three didn't. And Cheney always broke the tie against Colin Powell and for Rumsfeld. And so what happened was any president gives the vice president as little or as much power as they want. And it's always different, So Cheney was probably one of the most powerful vice presidents in history because he basically ran the whole foreign affairs thing. And Bush took his counsel over Colin Powell. Now, Colin Powell was best friends with his dad, because he was head of Joint Chiefs of Staff when we kicked out Saddam out of Kuwait and when we kicked Noriega out of Panama without one bullet being fired. Well, in Kuwait we had to fire bullets, but it was like 400 dead versus 40,000 dead. It was the most successful war in history. Anyway, so I think Bush, he gave Cheney so much power, and it's very surprising that he ended up dirty, Cheney. He was a great chief of staff for President Ford. He was in his 30s at the time. He was a congressman from Wyoming. And he was a great Secretary of Defense, one of the best under Bush 1 with Kuwait and with, we just talked about. But something happened to him besides putting on 100 pounds. I don't know what happened. He became dirty. And Bush really believed in, and Bush didn't get along with Powell the way his dad, they were literally best friends, and with Barbara too. Barbara jogged with him every morning, but he was kind of pushed a little bit on W by his dad during the campaign. If you remember, he announced, I'm going to make him Secretary of State during the campaign because that was good politics, because everybody loved Colin Powell. So, but he never had really connected with Powell the way he connected with Cheney. And he always listened to Cheney. And I'm just guessing that he didn't want to embarrass and humiliate Cheney and Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld, I don't think he was dishonest. I think he really also was fooled, thinking that there were WMDs there. And by the way, Cheney thought so too. But you know what happens when you're caught being wrong about something? You double down. If you're smart, you admit I made a mistake. But a lot of these politicians, you see them on both sides, they double down. And they want to believe, even though there's circumstantial evidence, there wasn't proof, but circumstantial evidence in Niger, or however you pronounce that country's name, that there were no WMDs. You still want to believe it so badly that you double down and you say, yeah, you just believe that there must be WMDs. So that's the only logical thing I could think of. And I guess hubris, a little bit of hubris. And he never actually, to the best of my memory, I don't think he ever actually came out after everybody knew there were no WMDs and actually acknowledged it. Right. So that would have been something like Reagan and Kennedy did acknowledge I made a mistake. Because in the end, what we have in Iraq today, it is fairly stable. I mean, we don't know how it's going to end up. I know that there are some bad people there shooting bombs at Israel and stuff. But it took 3 presidents to get it done over God knows how many years, starting with Bush. Obama actually escalated it, and then Trump finished it off. But hopefully, that government seems to be a friendly government right now. So maybe in the big picture, despite what happened to you, which is terrible, hopefully, unlike Afghanistan, we spent all those years and tens of billions of dollars. Can you imagine the Taliban just walking through the country and taking over without firing a single bullet, and Joe Biden just sits there and does nothing?
Yeah, I actually have a piece from my book that I'd like to just read real quick because it is about that, but it's also about Bush. And so this is from the Broken Mirror of Memory, my book. It's available on Amazon. And this is in the acknowledgments. To President Joe Biden, for your shameful withdrawal from Afghanistan, you and every president who oversaw the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan should go down to Section 60 at Arlington National Cemetery and beg the forgiveness of the honored dead. You should, in good conscience, await their response until it is given. At the very best, you could take proper care of the survivors. I won't hold my breath for any of it. And that's just how I feel.
I absolutely agree with you, Joe. Joe, that's a really beautiful way to put it. Honestly, all these countries ought to go visit their graves and beg for forgiveness the way some of these people act.
Yeah. That's I mean, that's just how I feel because in the context of the Trump indictments and all these, crazy things, in that context, I don't see why we couldn't bring George W. Bush up on charges for the torture, for the killing, for, the deaths of soldiers, based on what was faulty intelligence and then a doubling down on knowing it was faulty intelligence. I would like to see him stand trial.
But there's no law against that. There's no law against lying to the public. There
are laws against torture, though.
Well, who did he torture exactly?
Well, his administration authorized the torture. He holds command responsibility, therefore.
Well, you know what? That's how we get information out of bad guys. You're talking about waterboarding and things like that?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's the only way. The people that are being tortured are not nice people. Okay, these are terrorists and bad people that, if they have information that we need to avoid another 9/11, What else do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the alternative? What's the alternative to sticking their head in the toilet for whatever they're doing?
In my view, very respectfully, the alternative is following the law. But
well, there's well, you're talking about the laws from in
treatment of prisoners.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? You're right about that. But as you know, people laugh at those laws. Who can enforce that law and actually put President Bush in jail?
Sadly, no one, because we're not a signatory to the Rome Statute.
Right. So what you're doing, I say this respectfully, it's mental masturbation. It makes you feel good that you could put George Bush in jail, but it's never going to happen. So you know what? Tonight, when you go to sleep, you can imagine that you're putting Bush in jail, and I'll imagine I'm with Sharon Stone, and we'll both engage in mental masturbation. That's all it is. It ain't going to happen.
You're a great guy, Stephen.
So are you.
You're just a great guy. I know for a fact that I'll be waiting the rest of my life. I said that on a few podcast appearances. I just, the people killed alone. The firebombing of Fallujah, for instance, where they use shake and bake tactics. They would fire white phosphorus rounds in at the combatants, and then they would fire high explosive rounds right after to, actually take out those targets. That was a violation of the law of war too, but it never, it never got.
Do you fault Harry Truman, President Truman, for killing over 70,000 innocent civilians in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima? Do you fault him for that?
Yes, I do.
You really do?
Yes, sir. Frankly, yes, I do. Very respectfully to you, of course, because I know you'll probably disagree, but yes, sir, I do.
But you realize if he hadn't done that, we would have had to go to a ground war, which would have taken another 5 years. Those Japanese were crazy. They didn't give up on any, the kamikazes and everything. We would have had at least a million deaths between American and Japanese soldiers had we had to go to a ground war.
Yeah, that very well is likely true. What I guess I mean is I can see the utility of using certain tactics, but I don't have to. You know what I mean?
Well, of course. But you have to ask yourself, what's the alternative? And is the alternative better? In other words, what could if you're in a situation where your intelligence in America is so poor that you didn't see 9/11 coming, which is ridiculous, because we stopped infiltrating. And part of that was there was a law passed in Congress that limited what we could do. And the Israelis also, they used to infiltrate. They don't anymore. Their intelligence is just as bad.
Well,
the Yom Kippur War. How could they not have known about that? The Gaza attack. How could they not have known about that? So if your intelligence is so bad that 9/11 happened, right? And you want to make sure it doesn't happen again. You want to know who the other people are that are behind this thing and that are helping out. The only way you can get that information, because your intelligence is so pathetic, is to torture these guys who are already bad guys and have killed people and are responsible for killing people. If that's the only way you can get the intelligence to save millions of lives, possibly, if it comes to a nuclear war in the future. If that's your only option, there's really no alternative to that, unless you just keep your fingers crossed and you don't get the intelligence and keep your fingers crossed. That's why I believe, and Americans, as you know, are very isolationist right now. And before the Iraq War, if you remember, George W. Bush had to get permission of Congress because of the War Powers Act, and he barely got permission. That vote in the Senate was 52 to 48 or 51 to 49. I don't remember. But he needed permission to go to war against Iraq, and the American public was against it. Do you know in World War II? You probably know this. Roosevelt ran on his third term he ran on I will not enter World War II, because people have always been very isolationist. But then once we win, they changed their tune. Once we crushed Saddam in Kuwait, everybody loved George W. Bush. After we crushed Hitler and Stalin, well, Hitler really, Stalin was our ally. Everybody loved FDR and Truman. And another example was when Ronald Reagan became president, when he started building up the military like crazy, the American public was very much against it. They thought he was being provocative. But in the end, it ended up causing the deal between him and Gorbachev getting rid of 80% of the world's nuclear weapons. You get peace through strength. And the public opposes you at first if you're provocative or you do something like that. But if you win the war or win the Cold War, then everybody came to Reagan's side the same way they came to Bush's side, in the same way they came to, in the same way they came to FDR's side in World War II. So my opinion, going to the present now, had Biden, like I said, had one testicle, and I really thought he would do it after Iran attacked Israel. The first time Israel's been attacked since 1978.
It's unbelievable.
War, okay? Directly attacked by a country, not a proxy. If Biden would have just went in there, formed a coalition like Bush 1 did, with the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, basically every Arab country except for Iran, and brought in NATO. As you know, Germany, France, and the UK have given Israel given Ukraine so much help when we weren't. And they also supported Israel during this last thing. They helped us as well. If Biden did that, if we were able to take out Saddam Hussein, who had the fourth largest army in the world, we took him out in two weeks or 3 weeks, just through aerostrikes, a smart bomb. We could take out Iran in probably 1 week. And you know what? There'd be no more threat of nuclear war, in my opinion, for the next 100 years. They're the only country, if they're able to put a nuclear, the nuclear, whatever it is, on the warhead, they're going to use it because they're religious fanatics. They're not dealing with people like the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, or like China. They're not going to do anything crazy. But these people, because they're religious fanatics and they think Allah's coming next Thursday if they start a nuclear and they blow up the world, if we had taken them out, which would have been easy, because like I said, I'm telling you, Joe Biden not only would have been reelected with 60-40, he would have gone down in history as a great president for bringing peace to the world, same way Reagan after winning the Cold War, the same way FDR and Truman after winning World War II. He had this opportunity, I believe, after Iran attacked Israel. And, if we didn't shoot down those missiles, a lot of innocent people may have died.
Yes.
So I thought he missed. I was shocked. I really thought, oh my God, he's definitely going to do this. When I lived in Washington, everybody loved Joe Biden, but as you know, he's not mentally completely there. And instead of taking out Iran, what does he do now? He's knuckling under to these lunatics that are protesting in Columbia and all these colleges. And I don't know if you saw this 2 or 3 days ago. He's putting sanctions on Israel. Did you see that?
Yes, I saw he was sanctioning.
Yeah, I saw that as well.
Yeah, he's sanctioning a particular.
Can you imagine? Instead of taking out Iran, he's saying to Iran, "Oh, we're sorry, we're going to put sanctions on Israel," and saying to all these protesters, because he's afraid they're going to start riots at his convention, which they're going to do anyway, short of totally stopping all relations with Israel completely and declaring them an enemy. Short of that, there will be riots at the Democratic Convention. Ironic, it's in Chicago. That's where they had the riots in '68. And you're not old enough maybe to remember that. They had a split screen on TV showing Hubert Humphrey giving his acceptance speech and showing the rioters outside getting their heads beat in by Mayor Daley's stormtroopers and the National Guard and whoever. You're going to see the same thing. You're going to see these people. They're going to be out there, and I can't believe Joe Biden is sucking up to them. It shocks me, really. And he's when you try to take a middle ground, like support Israel when they did when they shot down those missiles, and then go against Israel at the same time to cower to his left-wing, part of his party. When you try to take a middle ground, what ends up happening is you end up pissing off both sides. And it's like what Jimmy Carter did when the Ayatollah took over. He let the Shah into America to get treatment for cancer, but at the same time, he didn't make the Shah give all that money back. The Shah took all the money out of Iran with him. He didn't make him give the money back. So he tried to take both sides. And what do you do? He ends up pissing off both sides. And how many years later is it now? 44 years later, we're still suffering for Jimmy Carter's ineptitude and letting those people take over. It's just the original Ayatollah, then it was his son, and his son, whoever's the Ayatollah now. And these are religious fanatics. And Jimmy Carter figures, well, the Shah's a bad guy. We're going to get rid of him. But you know what? The Shah was not a threat to anybody outside of Iran. So, and we're still suffering today from Jimmy Carter's mistake. And you mark my words, you heard it from me first. When Jimmy Carter does eventually die, which will be fairly soon, they're going to be rewriting history like you would never believe. They're going to say that he got the hostages out, that he was this great president. Problem is, they're going to get away with it because you've got to be at least 65 years old to even remember the hostages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
And let me correct both of y'all. The riots are already happening on college campuses thanks to this. So look at Columbia right now. You're blocking out entryways to classrooms and denying teachers entryways and causing teachers to get fired. Look at what Yale did. Those students stabbed one of their fellow students in the eye for being Jewish. Look at what USC did. Thanks to those rioters, the graduation is completely canceled. I always hold a grudge against Gen Z for being whiny and complaining and moaning and groaning and not taking action and canceling people. But personally, and you heard it from me first, I just didn't realize how big of an issue Gen Z was until now, because they're resorting to violence. They think that's the only way. And in a way, it relates to world peace. And I admire what Gen Z is doing, but doesn't have to be violence. And I think Joe Biden unintentionally incited that.
Not only that, he has not I don't know if you saw yesterday, the Speaker of the House, I forget his name, and about 30 other Republican congressmen went to Columbia to show support. But the positive about this thing is they've exposed themselves. It has nothing to do with Israel and Gaza. What do those students walking down the street, those Jewish students, what do they have to do with Gaza? This is pure anti-Semitism of the worst kind. And all we heard during the Trump years was how anti-Semitism is on the rise from the Proud Boys and these right-wing groups. Proud Boys never killed anybody or attacked anybody. And by the way, not only did you have the Speaker and all these Republican congressmen go there to support the Jewish students' right to just go to class, the Columbia University president, she canceled the last couple of days' classes and they have them virtually. So basically, she's rewarding the rioters and letting them disrupt everything. And it's mind-boggling. At least the president of Yale did come out and bring police in there. And I don't know if you saw this. The black guy who's the head of the NYPD in New York is this big, tough guy. He was screaming the other day, please let us in there. Let us in there. We're going to bust head. And this woman, I forget her name, the head of Columbia University, the president there, she refuses to let the police come in there. It's absolutely mind-boggling. But this has been going on for 40 years, indoctrinating young people. But you're right. It was never to a point of violence. It was during the Vietnam War, when the students were rioting. But you know what? They happen to be on the right side of history on that. But what you have here, they are flat out without and making any pretense. They're on the side with Hamas. They support Hamas. They support Israel being annihilated, and they support killing Jews. And they're not even making a pretense anymore of it being about Israel and Netanyahu. What do those students trying to walk to class at Columbia? What do they have to do with Benjamin Netanyahu? You know, his policies. If you disagree, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
but at least they're exposed. At least they're exposing themselves for the garbage that they are.
Yeah, I don't like going after people for their religion. I think that really puts a.
Oh no! Wait. Excuse me for interrupting. They go after it if they're Muslim. Then they go after you. But if you're Christian or Jew, it's okay.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, I
and
would.
The microcosm is Iran. The minute the Ayatollah took over during that hostage crisis, Jimmy Carter, the country was a third Jew, a third Christian, and a third Muslim. The day that they took over, every Christian and Jew had to flee for their lives. They came to America, thank God. But that's the microcosm what's happening now over here.
Right. And I would like to see a movement that is actually for peace. And I don't see these protests particularly.
That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, unfortunately, unless it's a movement of people on the right, people who support President Trump or support RFK Jr. But clearly the liberals are not for peace.
Yeah, you can see that with the funding of Ukraine. You can see that with the funding of Israel. You can see that with a lot of weapons sales around the world. The Democrats are not the peace party. There's no question about that.
I think the Republican Party, I haven't heard them make this their message. It's a great message. And, you know, all the anti-Semitism, it started in the 1980s and 90s with Al Sharpton, Louis Farrakhan, Jeremiah Wright, who was President Obama's mental, religious, spiritual leader. It started, the anti-Semitism from the left started with them, and now it's continuing with young people. We've lost a whole generation to this. Not the blue collar young people, but the ones that are going to these colleges.
Yeah, there's definitely a vein of anti-Israel sentiment that has turned into this anti-Jewish sentiment, it seems, in these protests, and I'm really disturbed by it, frankly. I'm a guy that marched against the Iraq War after I got back from the Iraq War. I mean, right. I've been a extreme anti-war protester, an extreme pacifist ever since. But when you go after people for their religion, you start shouting racial slurs at people. In my opinion, you've lost your way as a peace movement, so to speak, or you may never have been one to begin with.
Well, that's why this is different than the Cold War or the World War II. The people that are threatening world peace, it's all over their religious fanaticism. You know, Hitler and Stalin were both atheists. Mm-hmm. And what's happening now, it's all over radical Islam. And 90 to 95% of Muslims are great people, and Islam is a great religion. But they take it to the absolute extreme, the same way Anwar Sadat when he made peace with Menachem Begin, Israel and Egypt, he was killed by lunatic Muslims in his country. And if you remember, Yitzhak Rabin, president of Israel, he was killed for making a peace deal with the Palestinians by lunatic Jews who were against peace. So you have, unfortunately, in every faith, you have this like fringe group that hates people that are not of their religion. But unfortunately, maybe whereas the Jews and Christians, maybe it's 2 or 3%. With Muslims, maybe it's 7 or 8%, or whatever it is. It's a larger number, and they're easily able to indoctrinate when you have one party rule over there. And on college campuses, it's basically one party history, the way they teach history. And last thing, real quick, if you hate Israel and you hate Jews, you hate America. And that's another thing that the right wing, the Republicans, have not gotten this message out. That this thing that's going on in the Middle East is not just against, they see Israel as the little Satan and America as the big Satan. That's the words, their own words. And anybody who's pro-Israel is pro-America, and if you're anti-Israel, we come together. So I don't know why the Republican Party, they need to do a better job at communicating this to the swing voters anyway.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good insight. What do you think the future of the Republican Party is, going into this election and, past the second Trump presidency? What do you think the future of the Republican Party is? What do you see as the trend?
That's a great question. I really have no idea. If President Trump is reelected, you just never know. He could totally, just like when Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat made peace, that's Egypt and Israel, they were at war against each other. And they were very comfortable in a state of war. And when they finally hit their 70s, which is really like being almost 90 today, you start thinking about your legacy. And these were both really bad guys. They were both terrorists. The history of Menachem Begin killing the Stern Gang in England before Israel existed in World War II. They killed the King David Hotel in London. They killed all those British, the heads of their military. And Anwar Sadat was just as bad, had the Israelis on the brink of annihilation, had Nixon not bailed them out. But they became two great statesmen. You never know. If Trump wins, he might start thinking about his legacy. And if he has a second term, he might, I know there's no evidence of this from the way he talks and he acts, but he might become, you never know. He might just go in the other direction and realize, you know what, I'm going to stop. I have the power to stop the polarization within his own party and between the two parties and around the world. You never know.
Interesting. Yeah, I really hope that he does come to that. I hope that he can work across the aisle too, if that's possible. I'd like to see, both parties work together for America. It's like make both parties work for America
Right.
again. If I had a hat, that would be that.
Like you see, I understand his anger. I mean, because I've had things in my personal life where I'm thinking if I had the power, I understand his anger. Okay, I totally understand it. And with these prosecutions, whether he's guilty or not, at least 3 of them are political, all political. I mean, the one going on right now is ridiculous. I'm almost thinking the judge there is in cahoots with Trump because he's handed him so many things. There's no way this is going to survive on appeal. First of all, the judge gave money to Trump. His daughter is the head person of a group that stands to make money if Trump is convicted. And then he lets on the jury a woman who says she doesn't like Donald Trump, and he puts 2 lawyers and a financial guy on the jury. And then he puts this gag order on Trump, but he doesn't put one on Michael Cohen, who's in other words, Trump's ordered a gag order against all witnesses. Michael Cohen's one of them. But Michael Cohen's had a podcast for the last, 3 months? He's on every day just trashing Trump, and Trump's not allowed to. So I understand his anger that there is, but I can tell you this for sure. Remember, you heard it here first. I also honestly believe there's no way he can get convicted because I think Trump is wrong. He's thinking, Manhattan, 99%, 90% registered Democrats that are against me. But you know what? Being liberal, like those people are, is an advantage to Trump. You know why? Because the one issue where they're most liberal about is sex. And I'm telling you, that jury, the men on there are going to think it's so cool that he banged a porn star. And the women on that jury, I think he must be something in bed if he can get that porn star. I'm telling you, they're not going to get an acquittal, but they're going to have a hung jury there. And it almost seems as if the judge is throwing him. The judge can't be that stupid to do all these things that are either going to get, and not recusing himself, which he should have. That's also a grounds for appeal. When you give $10 to a candidate and you're well-to-do, that's worse than giving $1,000. You understand why? Because a regular person gives $1,000. You give $10, you're making a statement. Do you understand? It's not the money. That means he really loves Joe Biden. And there's nothing wrong with that. But he should have recused himself from this trial. It almost seems to me, I really believe that there's something going on for some reason. He's actually trying to help Trump either get a hung jury or get it overturned on appeal. There's no way Trump's going to be found guilty, at least in this first. It's obviously the weakest of the four cases, but it's the first one and the only one where Trump has to actually physically be in court every day because it's a criminal trial. And I really think there's something going on that I don't know what it is. Why is the judge handing him all this ammo for an appeal and for a hung jury? Why? I mean, I don't get it.
Yeah, he might actually be sympathetic. Despite the gag order, that's an interesting insight. Well, looking back at your career, what would you say was your most challenging campaign or a political project?
Let me think. I have to think about that one for a second.
Yeah, and that's fine. Do you mind if we go back to the 1960s so I can have a smoke?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'll have to think of what was the worst. I just thought of one.
Please.
My candidate was a guy in Florida who was running for local office. And in a Democratic Davie, Florida, which is a suburb of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, hardcore Democratic city. And he had he had a nude beach. And there's nothing wrong with that. And people in Florida don't think he owned a nude beach. And it wasn't even, nobody attacked him on it because down there people don't care, right? But on his website for his nude beach, he actually had pornography on his own campaign website. Now try to imagine, how do you get out of that? You can't. So he was like the first Democrat that ever lost a race in that city, So I would say that was, and I bring this up in my book. A lot of campaigns, you're halfway through the campaign when you realize you're on the wrong side. That the other person's actually, I'll give you a really great example, was it was a mayor's race for New Orleans, and the current mayor, Mitch Landrieu, he was our opponent, and we were supporting this guy named I forget his name, Guidry, who had a lot of money. And no, maybe I might be mistaking. I might be mistaking. I'm not sure if that was his name. But anyway, Mitch Landrieu was very liberal, but he was a decent, honest man. He's a sister of Mary Landrieu, the former senator, and the son of Moon Landrieu, who was the mayor there for like 100 years. But he's a decent man. And halfway through the race, I realized our candidate was so corrupt, because we have to look into our candidates too. We have to do opposition research on our own candidates as well, so we know when we're going to get attacked.
Oh.
So halfway through the campaign, I realized, but and a lot of lawyers, I guess, when they represent bad clients, it's their job. They have to represent them, and they realize that they're crooks. So a lot of us in any job, in any campaign, have situations, any person will tell you, any political hack will tell you that they realize halfway through that they were on the wrong side. It happens.
Wow. That's, and then, you have to continue with the job because you got to eat, so you got to keep going.
You have to. There was that guy. Do you remember what year? What 2002? There was that guy that was he was a Republican senator. They had this commercial against him, like it was like Saturday Night Fever, where he was dancing disco moves, and they showed him he put I don't remember what he did. He did something with his hand. He put it under a table and grabbed some guy between the legs. I don't remember what it was, but I can say, I worked in '94. I worked when I was with the Republican Congressional Committee. I personally did the research on behalf of Mark Sanford. You know what happened to him, right? He was caught in Argentina with a woman who was not his wife and had to resign. He actually became governor, and that same year, Lindsey Graham was also. These were Democratic seats that they thought were vulnerable. That we thought were vulnerable because the Democrat was either very bad or was resigning. And the whole South was Democrat until Ronald Reagan. And it went Democrat under Nixon, but then it went back to Republican. Went to Republican under Nixon because McGovern was so, radical. But then it went back to Democrat under Jimmy Carter because he was a Southerner. But Reagan personally single-handedly made the Democratic Party, the South, which had voted Democrat since the Civil War. They were still fighting the Civil War down there. He made them Republican. He turned the whole South into Republican. Now, of course, now it's starting to move a little bit. Georgia has become a purple state, and Texas is coming close to becoming a purple state. Texas presidential races, like the last 5 or 6 before this last one, Republican wins by 20 points. And the last one, if I'm not mistaken, I think Trump beat Biden only by about 6 points. So a lot of southern states are still hardcore 60-40 Republican. Some of them, like Georgia, is now a purple state. You have a good Republican governor, but you have 2 Democratic senators, if you remember. They had special elections last time. And a lot of Democratic local candidates. And that race is going to be very close, like the presidential in Georgia, just like it was last time. It's going to be very, very close.
Yeah, so it's gonna shake things up. Do you have a prediction for this upcoming election?
I would.
Go ahead.
You want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay. I would say it could go either way. I think most likely, since people are tired of Biden, Trump could win. But I think this year we could see a potential third-party candidate as president, such as RFK or Jasmine Sherman, who's also a candidate who's running, first non-binary person to be running, to be exact, and possibly, I hate to say it, Jill Stein could be, because both Republicans and Democrats, they're both bad. One wants war and is mentally unfit to be president, and one's just an overall douchebag. But if it's not an independent candidate, I would have to say Trump, because at least under him we had peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, your prediction, Steve.
Well, I can only go by if the election was held today, because a lot can happen in the next 6 months, right?
Yeah.
If the economy booms, it happened in Reagan's last year of his first term, and it happened in Clinton's last year of his first term. They got lucky. Their economic policies worked, but it took them. People didn't see it till the 4th year of their first term, and they both were overwhelmingly reelected. So if the economy somehow booms, Biden will win. But if the election were held today, I agree that people just want change, and people are so disappointed in Joe Biden, and people had high hopes for him because he was when I lived in Washington, he was like every Republican member of Congress loved the guy, got along with him. He was like their John McCain was the same way. He was beloved by all the Democratic members of Congress and staffers. And I think 10 years ago, when he had all his faculties about him, or maybe 15 years ago, he would have been a really good president. When he dropped out in 80, what year was it? When he lost to Dukakis, in 88. That was a huge mistake. Can you imagine dropping out because your speechwriter lifted part of your speech from somebody else's speech? I mean, considering the things that Bill Clinton did and still got elected, that was such a minor thing. But people thought in those days, because Gary Hart had to drop out because of an affair, people didn't realize that the public just didn't care about that. And Joe Biden, had he stuck out that race in 88, he certainly would have been nominated over Dukakis. Whether he could have beat George Bush, I don't know, because Bush was running as a third term of Reagan. People loved Reagan. So it would have been tough. But that Joe Biden of that time would have been an excellent president. But there's two things going on against him. Number one is all the wars, where under Trump we had peace. And we've now been dragged, because of Biden's weakness, first in Afghanistan, we've been dragged into all these wars. There's no way the Iranians would have let Hamas attack a terrorist attack in Gaza if Trump was president. There's no way that Putin and Russia and Ukraine would be at war, because Trump was very good friends and had great relations with both Putin and Zelensky. And now there could be shenanigans going on in Taiwan. We don't know. It's that, but that's not the main thing that people care about. People care about, as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. People are comparing how they were pre-COVID Trump to post-COVID Biden. And it's not even close. People were doing very well pre-COVID Trump, and post-Biden, sorry, I'm getting flustered here. Post-COVID Biden are not doing as well. People are struggling from paycheck to paycheck. And that's what people vote on. So today, and whatever negatives Trump may have had over the way he handled COVID, I think are balanced out by the fact Operation Warp Speed got us a vaccine a year before any other country did, a year ahead of schedule. Saved a lot of lives.
Yeah.
So I would agree with my partner. If the election were held today, I think Trump would win actually fairly easily.
Yeah. I hate to circle back, but I'm going to circle back to Iraq because it's
yeah. Go ahead. That's your passion.
Yeah, it's near and dear to my heart, and this is why I really don't want war anymore. And it was a helicopter crash. 7 soldiers were killed. It was September 17th, 2008, and we helped them transfer their bodies. It's called Stuck in These Boots. I can't just put those men away in boxes. Sand whips by us, and it feels like a cold night. It must be 65 degrees. We stand erect at perfect attention. Our shadows are carried in boxes. They are men who we might not have liked in life. We don't even know their names at present. But there we stand, our bodies aching from holding that same hand salute. The flag-draped coffins, red, white, and blue, and the chaplain offers prayer. How the fuck did we get here? I feel
it's a great question. It's a great question, and it's basically through, like I said before, we used to have really good intelligence, and the fact we stopped infiltrating the bad guys, and so did Israel. And that's why how they could not see the Yom Kippur War coming, and how they could not see the recent attack in Gaza coming is mind-boggling. And how America, this thing they've been planning for years, how it's obviously because we don't infiltrate the bad guys. Reagan and Gorbachev used to joke around when they made the trades for prisoners, the spies. They said it doesn't matter; they're both double agents anyway. That's what both sides did in those days. And how we got to the weakness of America, if you really think about it, we weren't weak until Joe Biden became president. We still were the world's only superpower, and we had pretty decent relations with Russia and with China and with even North Korea. Remember, Trump went over there, and they made a deal to have trade. And it was funny, Trump made the North Korean president go to Vietnam as an example of this is what happens when you make trade and you make peace. Such prosperity there. And they're a friend now, Vietnam. And it all really started happening. The weakness in America's weakness on the world stage, and us suffering from having to be dragged into all the turmoil over there. It really, unfortunately, started under President Biden, who I believe is a decent man and means well, and really had this great opportunity to make up for all the wrong that he did. Take out Iraq. Iran. Just take them out. They're the only real threat to, a nuclear war in the world. And we could take them out I'm repeating myself. We took out Iraq, which is the fourth largest army in the world, in 2 or 3 weeks. Smart bombs going down, and we took them out of Kuwait. We can take Iran out, and without Iran, there is no Hamas. Mm-hmm. So that's how you find. I know you're an isolationist and a pacifist, but if we'd listened to the isolationists and pacifists, we'd all be speaking German right now. If we'd listened to Neville Chamberlain
and Charles Lindbergh.
Right. So you have to look at the bigger picture. That if we don't go to war now and take Iran out now, 10 years from now or 5 years from now, we're going to have to go to a much, much bigger, more serious war if they have nuclear weapons. It'll be 10 million times worse. Just like if we hadn't taken out Hitler right before he was able to have a nuclear weapon, like I said, we'd be speaking German today. And if Hitler didn't have his problems with Jews, Oppenheimer, who was Jewish, would have built that nuclear weapon for Germany.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
So we have to show strength right now, the way Roosevelt did, the way Truman did, the way Ronald Reagan did, winning the Cold War. We have to show. If we don't show that strength now by taking out Iran, it's just going to get worse. And what if we don't take out Iran? And I'm sorry, I'm getting flustered now.
No, it's okay.
If Hamas is still around 5-10 years from now, what's to stop them, from going? Saudi Arabia doesn't have an army. Kuwait doesn't have an army. And Bush 1 protected those countries that had no armies when he took out Saddam. And if we don't take out Iran right now and the Ayatollah lunatics that are running that country, it's either now, and this is one thing in Netanyahu, he's completely right about this. If we don't take out Hamas and Iran now, what's the alternative? The alternative is Iran will have a nuclear weapon. The same way we took out Germany before Hitler had a nuclear weapon. We have to do the same now.
Yeah, it's certainly a way to view the world, and I have a lot of respect for your position. I truly do. I believe that you mean well, and I believe that I mean well. And
yeah, of course,
meaning people can certainly diverge on the path. I went way around the corner. You know what I mean? But that's just because of my direct, my experience.
Well, a lot of soldiers in all the wars become pacifists afterwards when they see all that death and destruction. Even John McCain, when he came back, he was kind of soft on. He was against the waterboarding, he was tortured in ways you don't even want to know.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being shot out of a plane and you land in enemy territory and break both your legs and one of your arms? That's why he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And they begged him to just leave. They were going to let him go, but he refused to leave. They wanted him to go because his dad was a big shot, and they didn't want him as a prisoner. His dad was a big shot in the military. And he said, I am not leaving until all my men leave first. And they just kept 6 years or 7 years he was in there. He was old. He was in his 30s when he was shot down over there. I don't know if he had several tours or he got in late. I don't know exactly what happened. But when he went through the worst torture imaginable, he was actually hung upside down, and you didn't want to know. But when he came back to America, if you remember, he was very much against the, what you were talking about, the torturing of the prisoners that we had in, what's the place where we were holding those guys?
Well, one was Abu Ghraib. It also happened in
Abu Ghraib.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was systematic, and it was pretty widely known within the military that it was happening.
Right. But he kind of became a little softer, but that it might have been good in that election in 2000. Because we won the Cold War, we didn't know about 9/11 or terrorism. Foreign policy became a non-issue in politics. We thought it was all over. We didn't know anything about these terrorists. So in retrospect, McCain probably would have been the better president because he would have been more tempered after what happened in 9/11. We see that in retrospect now. But it's easy, it's easy to be, Monday morning quarterback.
Sure. It's interesting to have it in that context because we may not have had an Iraq war if John McCain was elected.
Correct.
Yeah. That's something I can get behind, but on the other hand, I had positive experiences serving the country in Iraq. I met wonderful people in my unit that I wouldn't change for the world. And, if it was all said and done, if I'm honest, I would do it again.
I'm proud of you. And I thank you for your service. I was 1 year too young the last year of the lottery in Vietnam. Now, none of those guys actually went to Vietnam that last year because it was winding down. But they had a lottery by your birthday. They picked out numbers. And I was 1 year too young to be in that lottery. And my mother was already making plans for me to go to Canada. Because that's people were so against that war, Vietnam. Fortunately, it never came to that where I had to make that decision. But I do have regrets when I was in college, not at least joining ROTC or giving something back. I have or not having served in the now I'm starting to get forgetful. Not having served in the
armed forces.
When you're not, when you're on call. What's it called again?
A reservist.
Yeah, I regret not doing that, and at least having that experience, serving my country.
Yeah, it can be a positive experience and a negative experience all wrapped into one. It's boredom punctuated by sheer terror. And it's something that, and I know it's a dream, but just as, feudalism gave way to a large-scale industrial capitalism, it took 400 years, but it happened. Large systems and institutions, I believe, can change and do change. It's actually impossible to avoid because we live in an emergent universe where everything's always changing.
Right.
Do you think it's possible in a couple hundred years we may look back and say, gee, it sure was a shame, that we had war in the first place. Just like we look back now and say, wow, slavery was pretty wrong. That was a wrong thing to do. Do you think we'll have that situation with systems of organized killing at any point in our future?
I really okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think it just depends on the generation. And I think my generation right now, Gen Z, they like war. Otherwise, they wouldn't be having these anti-Semitic protests on college campuses and making a scene and acting like animals. But I think as the generations grow, say 2086, when we're all dead, or at least I'm in my 80s, maybe 90s, we're going to look back at all these wars and all this chaos and say, wow, why did it come to that? Why did we do that? We were ignorant back then.
Well, you're right that over the years people change, and 100 or 200 years from now, think about what the world was like 100 years ago compared to now. And you're right, people could just realize that war is ridiculous. But if you look at the history of humanity, we are created this way. Not every person, but we've had war since the beginning of the Old Testament up until today. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we are created for conflict for some reason. Now, I was just going to say something. Okay, forgot. Now I just remembered all this. If you look at all of the really big wars in the history of the world, when you every single one, it doesn't matter whether you're going back to. Doesn't matter which war you're going back to. I'm starting to mumble because when I talk too long, I start to get a little crazy. But anyway, so I'll start all over. In the history of mankind, we have been programmed to fight and go to war over the stupidest things imaginable. It's usually over religion, between Catholics and Protestants, between Jews and Muslims, etc. But I'll leave you with one last positive thing. In the history of the world, every major war, the bad guys always have the advantage because they don't play by the rules. It's like watching professional wrestling. Like one side, the good guys play by the rules, and the other side has foreign objects and the only way they can win is by cheating. So the bad guys have always had the advantage. The book 1984, George Orwell thought, and it was written in 1948. He thought, because of the advantage that the bad guys had, he was positive in 1984 it was going to be a completely totalitarian world, but it wasn't. Something happened in every major war since the beginning of time. The good guys always win. And when you consider that the bad guys always have the inherent advantage, you have to believe that there has to be some divine intervention there for us to still be at peace. And as bad as things are now, it's nothing compared to what the world was like in World War II, in World War I, even the Cold War. And when we had the blockade in Cuba, Presidents Kennedy and Khrushchev were both told by their military people, let's drop the bomb. And we came you're not old enough. We had shelter drills when I was in the first grade during the Kennedy administration, like fire drills. You had to go under the ground, underneath. We came so close. And when you think of all the terrible things that happened during the Cold War, the whole Eastern Bloc, every one of those countries living basically under slavery. Whatever's going on right now, it's very mild compared to what went on during world history, going all the way back, So if those wars can be won by the good guys, which they were, this can clearly be won by the good guys as well.
That's a lovely way to look at it. And it's something I hadn't considered, myself, that we do have things pretty good. And
why do the good guys always win when the bad guys always have the advantage?
Right. That's
why.
Yeah, you got to wonder if it is.
I mean, like I said, it was just the fluke thing that Hitler had this problem with Jews. Oppenheimer, Jewish man, would have made the bomb for him.
Hmm.
He just these flukish things happen in history, and don't even get me going off on the movie about Oppenheimer. Trying to, he's another one. He's a perfect example. He built the atomic bomb, and then after the war was over, even during the war, he became a pacifist and was against us using it in Japan. And I can say this because I'm Jewish. That scumbag, he was fine with building the bomb to save his people against Hitler, but he was against using it in Japan to save American lives and lives of everybody else. That guy was a total piece of shit. He should rot. I'm not going to say anything else. But this movie that just came out, making him into this great man, he's a piece of garbage. The way he turned on America, and he's the best example of a man who wanted war more than anything else to defeat Hitler, to save his people. He became this crazy pacifist. You know the story. He went in front of Congress and told them we should stop. They ended up kicking him out of the congressional hearings. Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of that, no.
Yeah, because he was so crazy and so pacifist and so against America being the bad guy all the time. So he's the best example of person who was so pro-war when it was defending Jews like him, but when it's defending other people that weren't Jews, he becomes this pacifist. He doesn't want nuclear weapons, and he said he regretted making. So
interesting.
I guess as a pacifist, at least think of future generations. If we don't take out Iran, or the Israelis don't take out Iran, or a smart president, Joe Biden can do this tomorrow. Put together the coalition that Bush 1 put together. Except this time we'd have Israel with us. Remember, in those days we couldn't put Israel in there because they didn't have diplomatic relations with all those other Arab countries, even though they were friendly. We could have a coalition tomorrow. United States, every NATO country, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, and Israel. We could take out Iran because it's the smart bombs were that we didn't know about them until the war in Kuwait. That's where all of Reagan's military buildup went. You drop a bomb from God knows how many miles up in the air and it goes into a silo this big. We took out all of Saddam's military. We took in 2 weeks. That when we went to the ground war after the air war, their soldiers were all running to us surrendering. Please take us. We don't want to go back with Saddam. And that was, by the way, that war was engineered by Colin Powell, who was the head of the Joint Chief of Staff, and on the ground, Norman Schwarzkopf. Get the credit for that. And George Bush 1 gets great credit for that as president. And if we hadn't taken out Saddam, I'm in Kuwait, next step, Saudi Arabia, no army. Next step, the Emirates, no army. He would have controlled over 50% of the world's oil if we did not go into Kuwait, which 48 senators voted against it in the War Powers Act vote. And most Americans were against it at the time. But then when it went so successfully, so well, because of the smart bombs, I have to say one thing. The smart bombs were actually started in Jimmy Carter's last year with Harold Brown, the defense secretary, but Reagan was the one that really built them up. And we didn't know they existed until that war in Kuwait. And if the thing hadn't happened in Kuwait, we still don't know they existed. We could use smart bombs tomorrow, take out Iran in 1 to 2 weeks. And you know what? You think anybody's going to fuck with us after that? And like I said, even the countries that have nuclear weapons, like China and Russia, they're not crazy. They're not religious fanatics. Right, and we could have a peace. We take them out now, we will have a peaceful world. But obviously, this president doesn't have the balls to do it, or the brains to do it.
Yeah,
actually, part of the problem, his brain is too tense. You understand? 2/10 the size of a normal brain.
Huh. Yeah, I don't think he's there anymore. I think he's losing it.
It's sad because he's a good man. But
right.
But he's not the right man to be president.
Right. I mean, I've always felt like, that Biden is at least a decent human being,
He is.
cares, you know,
He is.
I really
Yeah.
do, but I think he's losing it. You know, the last question I can think of, and then you can do whatever you want. You can stay on and you can hang out with me. That's totally cool.
Okay.
Given your
It'd be
very
fun.
successful career, appearing on Anderson Cooper, Fox News, some shows I don't even know about, like Crossfire. What is it that you want your legacy to be? What do you want to leave to the world after such a successful career, a successful book, and so many years working in politics?
Well, honestly, right now I'm more focused on music right now. But as far as the political end, if I could convince personally President Biden or President Trump, if he wins, if I could convince either one of them, sit down and just make the argument I've made right here. We take out Iran, the world will be safe for maybe forever, at least the next couple of 100 years. If I could convince either one of those to just do, like I said, I know I'm repeating myself, same thing George Bush 1 did, put together a coalition. Now, Bush 1 had an advantage. You know why he was able to get all those Arab countries in line with us? From his days as an oil man. He was the president of all those Arab countries on a first name basis because he did business with them. And so he was able to put together that coalition. But today we can put it together because those countries are now friendly with Israel. Even though Saudis don't have and the Saudis don't have technically an agreement like the Kuwaitis. They are friends, and Israel protects them. They have a deal basically where Israel protects them militarily, and they give Israel very cheap oil, and they're great friends actually. And the Israeli and the Egyptian armies are, to some degree, even integrated. We have this chance. We don't need Bush 1's connections. We have a chance to put a great coalition together. As we've seen, NATO has been stronger than America in supporting Israel and supporting the Ukraine. We have a great chance right now to put together a great, world coalition of the Arab countries, NATO, U.S., and Israel. Take Iran out once and for all. Correct Jimmy, I'll never lie to you, Carter's mistake that we're still suffering from. And I promise we'll have world peace at least for a very, very long.
No, that's insightful and something that I hadn't considered. And I really do appreciate your time coming on the show with us today.
I appreciate you inviting me on. I get to ramble on.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and definitely stick around after the show for a second. I have some questions. Just between you and me, I'm very interested. But
okay.
I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Ward.
I appreciate you letting me on.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
How do you you tell me that you're really an angry person? How do you stay laid back? You're a very laid back guy. I'm always half crazy. How do you stay so laid? I'm not being serious. How do you stay so laid back? Is it your faith? What is it? Great marriage? What is it that you have? No, I'm being really serious.
Sure. I started a lot of a Buddhist meditation, and
okay.
I really learned to control, 15 years ago when I were having this conversation, I would have been yelling at you. Frank. But now I see the inherent value in all human beings, and I know that your opinion comes from your lived experience, and I have to show respect for that because you're coming from a place of good. You really want good in the world. I know you do because I've talked to you.
Well, I know you do too.
Yeah. So it's that's how I stay so chill is really just a lot of Buddhist meditation.
Okay. Now this is a dumb question because I'm ignorant on this stuff. Can you be of a different faith and be Buddhist meditation too?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You can
It's
any
like being a Unitarian. You can believe in one faith, but believe that people of all faiths pray to the same God. It's kind of
sure.
the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that's how I've, come to a sort of peace in myself. And
Okay.
I'm definitely gonna have to send you a copy of the book. I'll be happy to send it through Caden if you want, but
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna wrap the show, but like I said, stick around after for just a little bit. I have a question for you.
So just keep the computer on like it is now.
Yeah, just leave it. Yep, just leave everything. Um,
Okay.
folks, I just want to close with our normal saying. Remember, folks, until next time, be humble, be kind, and until next time, peace.
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 I don't know how to do it.